My dad owned a zoo at one point, Newquay Zoo in Cornwall,
No way.
which was epic. He owned Newquay Zoo I was the age, like he bought it when I was like 5, and then like I think sold it when I was 10. I was like the most popular I've ever been in my entire life during that period. Like my mum was inundated with requests for play dates
Can
with
imagine.
I was rinsing that. And then like the slush puppy machines, it was great. Great
Was
time.
that kind of a reason why it had to be sold? Was you were kind of driving down the revenue stream because you kept them taking all the free stuff?
I think that was it.
Hi, it's James, and welcome back to the Green Room. This week, I'm joined by Charlie from the Anti Greenwash Charter, as well as a few other organisations that we'll touch upon today. Charlie, now that we're in the Green Room, I want to know what's one of your biggest pet peeves in the workplace when it comes to sustainability?
Well, in my world, in the sustainability communication space, I would say my biggest pet peeve is the lack of confidence in organizations and individuals communicating about sustainability. I think that is where we are, and I think it's incredibly dangerous. So that would be my biggest issue, if you like.
You know, a big topic for us that we'll be discussing today is around greenwashing, greenhushing. So before we really dive into that, for the listeners out there who may not be aware, could you give us a bit of a rundown on what both greenwashing is and greenhushing?
Sure. So I'm going to probably butcher the exact definition that we use.
I want the Charlie definition today.
Charlie definition. Essentially, greenwashing in my head right now is determined as any misleading or mischaracterized position, i.e., use of language, use of imagery, use of color, to represent something as being more sustainable. And that covers both environmental sustainability and social impact than it is. That is what I would determine a greenwashing to be. In terms of greenhushing is essentially the counter of that, where organizations choose not to communicate anything about their sustainability credentials for fear of being accused of greenwashing. And essentially that's greenhushing.
From your perspective, the way you spoke originally around your pet peeve within the workplace, you know, communications linked to sustainability, is greenhushing in your eyes potentially just a lack of confidence? Or is it a bit more of a, we know we're probably doing something wrong, so we should just keep quiet?
Well, I think it's another thing. It's both. I think one of the things that's most worrying in certain sectors and verticals is how we're becoming apathetic towards sustainability in many ways. We're not as concerned about the credentials, or we have expectations of our products being sustainable without necessarily needing to have it front and center in terms of the way that the product is communicated in terms of its credentials. So I think that's a problem, but I think that problem is fed by greenhushing, by people themselves when it comes to communicating around these sorts of topics. So I think everything sort of influences one another. But I do think, in my mind, in the conversations or organizations that we've dealt with, there are more entities that just lack the confidence to say, well, we're just worried that we're going to get something wrong. And that is ultimately the environment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I've been to a few kind of panels and podcasts, and I think there's a lot of concern as well because of the age of social media and where the world we're living in with communication. It's so easy for something to go out and for someone to immediately just disagree with it. Regardless of the person disagreeing, it's their opinion. Often it's not based on fact. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just purely an opinion. And I think that can scare a lot of organizations. Even when they've got all the evidence to back it up, there's still that level of hesitancy to actively push a narrative and say what they really mean.
Here, James, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the most dangerous terminologies that has become popular in the 21st century, or certainly this decade, this notion of my truth, I think is deeply concerning and worrying because it encapsulates exactly what you've described, which is we can have no objective truth in that sense. Anyone's opinion can be determined to be truth because it's their truth and it's their take upon what they think the truth is. I think we're in a really dangerous age, if you like. The way that we describe it when we're talking about this to potential clients of ours or signatories of the charter is that we really have gone through an explosion of content in terms of self-publication. Now in the age of AI generation, we're just engaging with so much content. And essentially there have been very poor rules of engagement around how we communicate with each other, like standards, like we all collectively agree are the standards. And it's been as described by a colleague of mine, the wild west of communications for the last 25, 30 years, highlighted by the digital age. And I think that's where our work comes in, because what we want to do is say, well, look, we've got a collection of organizations that are going to say, look, we have a shared standard of communication practice that we think everyone should uphold. If we do all uphold that and can prove that we're upholding those standards, we as a collective can be trusted to a greater extent.
So it's a really good point. I mean, kind of ladders on as well. If you're able to, just explain a little bit more around what you're doing at the Anti Greenwash Charter.
Sure. So essentially what we did, we were given a brief. We used to run a marketing and comms agency. We predominantly work in the built environment sector here in the UK. And essentially we got a fascinating brief from two clients off the back of the CMA's Green Claims Code being published in 2021. That's the Competition and Markets Authority for anybody that's keen to know more. And they published that in early 2021. These two clients came to us and said, guys, we've got a brief for you. And the brief is, we know that we are responsible corporate communicators, but we want you guys to come up with some sort of campaign that we can run in order to prove to all of our stakeholders that we are exactly that. So we interpreted that and said, guys, the brief is, how do you go about proving that an organization is a responsible corporate communicator? And I just thought it was amazing. I was like, that's such a brilliant brief to get tucked into as somebody who's interested in comms and marketing. And what we came up with was essentially three key things that we thought a responsible communicator would do. The first thing they would do is train all their staff and make sure that everybody was aware of the issue, because so many instances of greenwashing or misinformation are caused by lack of understanding, especially when you're transitioning data and information from your ESG or sustainability department to your marketing and comms teams. So that was the first thing. And we also now conduct training at the C-suite level as well, because we think it's really important that C-suite's aware of the issue, because it is core and fundamental risk, if nothing else, within the organization. So that's the first step. Second step would be to carry out what we call an evergreen or static content review. So that's where you take your website, your brochure materials, anything that remains fairly static, and check that that content is aligned with relevant regulations. So here in the UK, we have the Green Claims Code. We have other directives around the world. We have the Green Files in the US. We have the EU's Green Claims Directive, which essentially checking that your content, use of language, is aligned with those regulations is the second step. The third step in the process is to publish what we call a green claims policy. And a green claims policy is a really foundational, fundamental part, we think, of presenting yourself as a responsible corporate communicator. And essentially what it details is all of the practices and procedures that you as an organization implement in order to ensure that you are exactly that. So for example, it details your editorial process. How do you check content before it's published? It details your escalation procedure. How do you make sure that if somebody's got a concern around something that they're engaging with, that they know how to engage with you as an organization and query that and get to understand it better. But even down to things like having a database of all of the claims that you want to make about your offering, so that anybody can go into your green claims policy and interrogate the evidence that you've got for those claims, etc. And that's essentially the work that we do at the Charter. We certify organizations that have been through that process, and we then carry out what we call campaign reviews to ensure that they maintain those standards, are implementing their green claims policies appropriately, and therefore can retain their signatory status.
Just from listening to you can hear about the passion you have within the world of sustainability. And my kind of question to you around all of this is, where does the responsibility fall? Is it falling on marketing agencies and they should have more knowledge than, say, brands do? Or does it really fall on the marketing departments that exist within brands? Where do you think the main focus should be, and who should be taking potentially more responsibility?
Brilliant. Absolutely superb question. I'm going to use one case example with this. We have a couple of agency signatories of the Anti Greenwash Charter, and we've worked with them quite uniquely in a sense of thinking with them about the process and the due diligence that they show when going through checking and validating the claims that their clients provide them with in order to produce the claims they then produce on their behalf. I think there is a responsibility definitely on agencies working with clients, with brands, to have a clear way of going about challenging their clients regarding the claims and the language that they want to present on their behalf. So the agencies that we've worked with have said, we have had instances in which we've had to turn around to our clients and say, we are not prepared to feature said claim in that campaign because you have not, you failed our process in terms of validation of that claim itself. So I think that's important if you're a creative agency working, or any type of professional services firm that's working with a client. I think you have that obligation to challenge. But I do think that, coming back to your point in terms of where the real kind of impact lies, is it does lie on marketing and sales teams, I would say, within organizations being better informed and aware of sustainability related information and issues, so that they themselves don't go about producing content that misinforms. And I mentioned sales teams because we did a piece of research a couple of years ago, and it found in that piece of research that actually it was the sales agents that people thought they experienced the most amount of greenwashing through, as opposed to the advertising, the media, etc., which I thought was fascinating. Obviously requires those sales teams members to be upskilled in this area as well.
No, I can appreciate that. We've had a few conversations with organizations that we work with where there's been a bit of reactive work that's needed to be done because of tender processes and sales processes. And it's like, we might have said something we don't actually do. And you're like, well, can you retract it? No, we can't. Okay, well, we need to fix it then. So I can understand that entirely when it comes to having the sales team really wrapped up in that process. You're a big advocate for green claims policies, as you kind of highlighted before. When is the best time, would you say, for an organization to introduce one? And, what's the real starting point for a listener who potentially works in the marketing department of an organization? This is all incredibly new. Where should they be starting?
We have a policy template on our website that literally talks you through the process of producing your own green claims policy. I think that's the starting point. The feedback that we've had is that for a lot of people, it's just a really interesting mirror to hold up to the way that your organization manages this part of your business. Most people haven't really thought about this stuff, but they just do it anyway. It's things like, oh yeah, well, we use AI in a way that's, we just use it at the ideation stages and we produce, but the final creative, we always make sure that it's produced by a human hand or a human keyboard or whatever. It's things like that this just triggers people to think about and go, wait, have we thought about how we actually do that? And have we detailed it? We put it down on paper. I think that's the starting point. Inform yourself about the areas that make up responsible marketing and comms, and then use our template to go from there.
We'll link the template on the YouTube channel, so it'll be in the description below. And I guess there will be some proactive organizations, probably the ones that, are working with yourself, where they want to put themselves forward. Where I see the biggest change is where people's hands get a bit forced. So the likes of regulations coming in, they've got across the EU, they're introducing the ECGT. So, that element of anti greenwashing is all tied into that, and that comes into place next year or later next year. You've already mentioned a few kind of green claims codes that exist across different jurisdictions. For someone potentially hearing about some of this stuff for the first time, could you highlight, particularly based in the UK and Europe, what the really big things are that they should be looking for, potentially regulations that they need to align with, or the direction of travel within sustainability comms?
Sure. And I think the goalposts are always shifting. Anybody that's following any kind of ESG, sustainability related regulation coming out of the EU, for example, over the course of the last year or so, will know that it's been like waking up one Monday morning thinking the world looks like a particular way, and then by Friday it looks completely different. So I'm probably overstating it there, but essentially it's been a bit of a wild west.
I think you're pretty truthful, to be perfectly honest with you, in that space.
It's not far, is it? So here in the UK, we are governed ultimately by the Green Claims Code. There's also the Digital Market and Consumers Act earlier in this year that provided some additional protections from a consumer perspective regarding comms. What we always do with organizations we're working with is that there are some core fundamentals that, regardless of which regulation you look at, are at the heart of what they're trying to do. Claims, language, context. These are the three core pillars that if you're an organization that's listening in and you're concerned around this area, that's the place to start. So from a claim perspective, we're talking about full and transparent and ideally verified substantiation of your claims and the evidence that you have to back up those claims. So that's a core first sort of place to start. The next is language. We are getting to the point where there are certain regulations that are essentially outlawing particular uses of terminology. So that's where you really do need to check the small print of what's in those regulations and therefore what I can and cannot say. But that's the next step. And the final step is, for me, the number one, which is context. And this is where the majority of misleading communication around sustainability sort of stems from. And what that is have you disclosed the context that fits around this particular piece of content that you're using to promote, presumably, one of your sustainability initiatives or one of your performance metrics? To give you a flavor, you've got HSBC from a few years ago getting into a whole lot of hot water when obviously they produced this amazing campaign that from a claims perspective and a language point of view was all completely above board in terms of what they had put together. But when you looked at the context of them promoting the fact that they had, I think, invested sort of 4.8 billion into renewable related projects or investments, it was then pointed out that the context of how much more they were investing into fossil fuel related investments made it ridiculous and ultimately made the work that they had done around language and claim pointless, because essentially the whole thing is now tarnished with, well, it's just misinformation because the context hasn't been considered. So I know I've given you a long answer there, but think when you're thinking about your sustainability comms, claims, language, context.
Appreciate that. And I think one thing that intrigues me in this space, you mentioned HSBC, where their money was going. From your perspective, the really big organizations that the likes of Shell and BP be doing from a communication standpoint, how should an organization like that be promoting their work and their elements that are sustainable?
So the first thing they should do is they should produce and publish a green claims policy to provide the layer of transparency that would be, I think, welcomed. The other thing that would be crucial within a green claims policy that we require every signatory to include as the first section within the policy is the acknowledgement of the areas where they as an organization are not sustainable. We've had the masterclass in sustainability comms last week from Patagonia with their first ever progress report. I'm now drawing comparisons between Patagonia and Shell, so just bear with me as I try.
I'm intrigued.
I'm intrigued as well. I don't know where this is going to go. But essentially, they are in such a privileged position of being the poster child of corporate sustainability. They're in such a strong position that they're able to produce something like that literally had, I think, on the second page or whatever, nothing we do is sustainable as one of the headlines. That ultimately is what I think more organizations are going to have to adopt, which is there is no more hiding place. There is no opportunity to not disclose or to provide that lack of context. You just got to upfront detail the context. But the amazing thing for an organization like Shell or any other, what you would consider bad actor from a sustainability perspective, is that if you do that completely, and I'm not suggesting they would, but if they were to do that with fullness and completeness, it would actually liberate them as a brand to then speak confidently about those things that they are doing, because they would have already negated, if you like, that concern around, well, this is all just a load of nonsense, Shell, because you really haven't been upfront and acknowledged the areas where your operations are having a hugely detrimental impact upon the environment. I'm not saying it's easy and it's a radical thing for them to do, but I think Patagonia shows every other organization that the thing that you have to do, regardless if you're very good or you're very bad, is you have to be straight, and being straight around context is key.
I think as well that's potentially a bit hard for a marketing department to do when you come to like that brutal trust. Often marketing departments are hired to, paint yourself in the best light, which is often hiding the stuff you don't really want to talk about, and maybe emphasizing a little bit more of the stuff you do or exaggerating to a certain extent. So it's a radical thought process, I'd argue, as well, for marketing departments to take that more honest approach and be like, hold our hands up here, we're not the best at that. I guess as a result, potentially concern from like PR fallout and loss of brand trust. But what would you say to that?
The way that our signatories are now using their policy is that a lot of them have got these disclaimers at the bottom of, blog articles or product pages or whatever, that basically says, look, if you'd like to find out more about how we've gone about reproducing our claims that you've engaged with on this page, or if you'd like to find out a bit more around the context within which we've made this page, go and check out our green claims policy. And what that does, again, coming back to your point about the creative marketeer who's thinking, I want what's on this page to be really positive and promotional around the great things that we're doing with this product or with this service or wherever else might be, is that they're liberated because they have that policy. If you've driven people or provided people the opportunity to engage that policy, you can now be confident to go, we're doing some great stuff here.
And if people wanted to understand a bit more, they can reach out to the Anti Greenwashing Charter to learn more. Not just obviously you've got the template for the Greens Claims policy, but more so the implementation side of it all as well.
Yeah, absolutely. On the website, they'll be able to download the template, but as you say, run through our process as well.
Amazing. What's one thing that makes you feel hopeful about the future of sustainability communication right now?
Patagonia's report, where it's like, if the poster child of corporate sustainability is acknowledging that nothing that they do is sustainable, truly, in the truest sense of sustainability, then that's an amazing moment for us all to go, oh, great. Well, if they've said it, then maybe we can all be a little bit less sort of misrepresentative of what we are. So that's what gives me hope.
Thank you so much for joining me in the green room today, Charlie.
James, thank you for having me on. You've been a brilliant host. Thank you for having me.